Welcome. This is the ongoing aspect of your teaching series, which I think you all know for at least the Board of Pediatrics. I'm not sure about other boards. You have questions from this whole section of Fellows Core Curriculum, except for this, which they have to verify locally. Actually, I was on the board when we tried to write questions about this, and it was really hard to write questions about teaching. They were all either really obvious or really esoteric. So I'm going to talk about the lecture. And hopefully enhancing teaching and learning in large group presentations. So we'll talk more about learning objectives, but the learning objectives for this are to list advantages and disadvantages of lectures, outline ways to incorporate adult learning principles, which I think you're going to hear more about next week, describe organization of the talk, delineate effective presentation styles, discuss strategies to enhance interaction, and list some PowerPoint tips. So you all are very experienced learners and teachers at this point, and so thinking about different methods or venues where we teach. So we do a lot of clinical preceptor model teaching, like at the bedside or in the clinic. The 1-minute preceptor is a favorite, and I think Aditi already went over some of that, right, Bob? I think Aditi talked about 1-minute preceptor and various clinical preceptor models. Reading, online modules, role play, workshops are really interactive ways to teach. Simulation, small group discussions, both TBL, team-based learning, or problem-based learning, and then the large group discussion, or not another lecture, but hopefully we're going to make lectures more fun for everyone. So John Holt, who's an educator, said the biggest enemy to learning is the talking teacher. And thinking about cognitive or learning theory, you want to build your teaching on the assertion that learners are just not passive recipients of information. So it used to be thought, especially in elementary school, that the children were blank slates or empty vessels, and you just poured the information into them. But that's not true even at the elementary level, let alone at you all's level. So we actively construct our own understanding as we're hearing a lecture, and you want to keep people actively doing that. So tell me advantages, think of some advantages of a lecture. There's got to be a few. So the lecture or a large group discussion.
You know what content is covered.
Okay. So content's known, right, and planned ahead. Great.
Typically organized.
I'm sorry?
Your talk is typically organized.
It's organized, right, because it's organized, it's planned.
And make sure all your learners are getting the same information.
Great. So same content to all. And another part of that is you build everyone's foundation, so everyone comes out hopefully with the same foundation if they retain it.
I think you're reaching a wide audience rather than sort of a
Great.
one.
So multiple learners at once. So there's an efficiency in that, right?
We hope.
We hope. If they learn.
Generally, there's visual aids.
Okay, good. So you can supplement it with visual aids that you have ahead of time, right? Great. And what about disadvantages?
Usually one-sided.
Yeah, it's usually a monologue, right? Or unidirectional, yes. What else?
It's like you said, it's very passive.
Okay, right.
Passive learning.
So passive learners.
Easy to hide in the back row.
Who said that? Great. So you can be, I know you're not, but you can be disengaged, right?
There's multiple different learning styles, and not everybody learns by
Great,
being talked to.
okay. So there's so many learning styles or preferences, and so as far as learning preferences, if you use VARC or Kolb learning styles, I don't know if you know either of those, who's not going to do well? There's several people that don't do well in a lecture, but who really doesn't do well? Do you know? It's the K in VARC, if you know VARC.
What is
Or like hands-on learning.
So visual, auditory, read, write. Yeah, hands-on, so experiential learners, or what the VARC part is kinesthetic,
Yeah.
right? So kinesthetic, experiential learners hate lectures. Like, I am Miss Read Write, so I love lectures, but that's because I take notes and retain more. But, great, all right, perfect. So you guys hit a lot of these. So information-laden content, so you can distill a lot of content into one setting, builds on a framework, it's economical or efficient, it's careful, lucid presentation of material, so you can clarify complex information, or synthesize information from many sources, right, and have it all pre-prepared. You can see a professional mind at work, which is really fun. Did any of you go to this morning's lecture? He was like an awesome lecturer. He was such a great example of a great way to do it. Anyway, I would say look at the recording, but it didn't record, so. But anyway, you could just see his mind at work. And some learners love lectures, okay? And then, as you all elucidated, squelches certain learning styles or preferences, much less interaction between the teacher and learner, and it's really hard to gauge what the learner's taking away. When you're doing bedside teaching or team-based learning, right, you know where the learners are, and you can actually interact with them and figure out what they're struggling with, and also maybe where they're misinterpreting things. You can't accommodate individual differences. Learner is passive and way in the back. And then decreased retention, which we'll talk a little bit about. So what is in fact, we'll talk now. What's the average % retention of material taught in just a lecture? So no audiovisual aids, just me talking.
2%.
2%. Do I hear any other guesses?
10%?
15%, 10%, 30%, okay.
Won't this depend on if you're an auditory learner or prominent?
It does, and people have not actually looked at that. They did not break that down. Okay, Adam, fine. And it also depends how you interact with it. But so lecture, in and of itself, about 5%. If you add reading to it, 10%. If you add audio visuals, 20%. If you're demonstration or a discussion group where people get involved, you start increasing retention. Practice by doing, and you all know this, right? If you give a talk or you teach others, you're gonna retain a lot more. So, so anyway, just being aware of what your audience is gonna take away. If it's just a lecture without audio visuals or without reading slides, it's gonna be really low, but even with it, pretty low. And we're gonna talk about ways to enhance interaction and hopefully enhance retention. So when is lecturing appropriate? Some people would say never, but I think in the medical world many of us would disagree. So conveying information, providing structure for material that you're going to add on to, right? Like if you're doing a hem-onc lecture and then you're going to go see patients with that disease, that's going to help. Display a method or example of how one thinks. It's good with large groups. Emphasizes a topic valued by the department. So, for example, diversity and inclusion is one of our pillars and one of our strategic initiatives within the whole department. And so grand round, we have a couple of grand rounds on diversity and inclusion per year. Similarly with community engagement. So similarly we do an education day. So we try and emphasize things that are valued by the department. And then the other thing is to inspire and motivate learners to explore the topic further. So after this morning, I was really interested in palliative care. You know, I mean, he really emphasized a lot of cool things. And then these are things where it's less effective to teach skills, behavior, transfer knowledge to new situations, problem solving, remote retention, so retention much later. So when you think about a great lecturer, what made him or her good or great? I know you've had one, maybe two.
Like engagement with the audience.
Okay, very engaged, interacting with the audience, great. What else?
I think someone who's just enthusiastic about their material.
Yeah, where you just know they are so passionate about what they're talking about, their research, their disease process, whatever.
They have a good pace so you can actually follow along without them dragging you along.
Yeah, so they're not uber slow,
Yeah.
monotone, but they're also not so fast that you've lost them, right? Anything else, that, even in like college lectures or?
It's more conversational rather than them just reciting information.
Great, so they're not haven't sort of memorized everything, or they're not referring to their notes constantly, right? Great. So there are successful teachers often have similar strategies, which we'll talk about, but may have very different teaching styles, you know? They don't have to be like uber enthusiastic, but you're still gonna learn from them. You do want them to establish a positive learning climate where people feel comfortable and are not ultra stressed, so you're not absorbing, right? If you're uber stressed that they're gonna call on you, for example, in a large group lecture format, that may not work so well. They have goals and objectives, right? They have a purpose for what they're doing. Its content is organized, and then the enthusiasm that you all mentioned. They also ideally welcome thought and discussion, hard to do in like a grand round setting or a bigger setting, but definitely doable, and we'll talk about that. They summarize and repeat key points or concepts and back those up. And they hopefully involve learners and promote interactivity. So having you answer and ask questions, want you to self-reflect, promote active learning. So, and next week, Kate McDaniel and
Deb
Deb
Rangel.
are gonna talk about adult learning principles, but just some basics when you're thinking about teaching adult learners, which all of us are. It's a little different than pedagogy or teaching elementary school kids. So they're self-directed learners in general. They're goal-oriented, they're practical. They want to feel respected, okay? They have life experiences already, and they learn best when learning is based on an existing framework. So I always say in medicine, we couldn't be luckier. Like, right? Like, we need all of this. We need to take care of patients so people are invested in what we're teaching. It's very practical. We hopefully are respectful. So we meet a lot of these key things for adult learners to learn because of what cool things we're teaching, right? Either at the bedside or in a lecture format. So I think that helps us a lot. So things we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about creating a positive learning climate, the organization of the talk, presentation styles, and then a little bit about media used, okay? And so the climate, literally. So you want to try and get there ahead of time and make sure it's not too cold, not too hot, the lighting's good, the chairs and tables are set up the way you want. This is the ideal thing. That there's not phones going off, that there's food if it's provided, and that the audiovisual equipment works, right? So you want to get there so everything works well. So you're not stressed about how things are organized. And ideally, you want to shut the windows or whatever if there's sirens outside and that kind of thing. You want to avoid, like somebody thankfully shut the door for me when everyone was chatting out there. And then the figurative climate. So you want to create an area of respect. You want to set the tone, and you want to allow discussion. Okay, permit questions, and you all know a lot of this. So that's climate. That's all we're going to talk about climate. But structure of the presentation is our next part. So I think you had a talk on curricular design. And so this is part of educational program planning. And this is things to think about not only for one lecture, but also a whole curriculum. And I think many of you, as part of the ACGME requirements, many of you as third years or sometimes second years are asked to design the curriculum for your subspecialty, right? That I know ID, we have them do that. I think some other groups, they have you design it. So you want to think about the educational need or problem, which may mean looking at the Board of Pediatrics content specs, right? Or it may mean doing a needs assessment of the audience. And some people do a needs assessment actually in the lecture. Do you know how you can do that? Like this is somebody who's really talented, right? If they're going to be able to do a needs assessment and then talk to that, that's skilled. But you can do it ahead of time. Some of our senior residents will do a needs assessment before they give a talk. So what is a needs assessment? You know, ways you figure out what the audience needs to know, besides looking at a textbook with the outline to think of your subspecialty. Surveys, yeah, so do a survey to figure out what people know and what they don't know. So when we were doing EBM, we did a survey to find out, did people know what a cat was, besides the little four-legged creature? And, you know, those kind of things, to figure out what level we needed to do our EBM for fellows versus residents. Another way to do it is a focus group, you know, so to grab 5 of you from different subspecialties and say, okay, we want to make sure you learn about this. How should we do that? So anyway, that's a needs assessment. So define the educational need. Sometimes you don't have that. You just know, okay, you're giving a talk on tularemia. And then you have to decide sort of what you think the audience needs to know. Next, you develop goals and objectives, and we'll talk about learning objectives, because tularemia is key to learn about it, of course. And then talk about teaching strategies. And then implement it, and then ideally be evaluated and receive feedback and figure out how you can do better the next time. So part of the goals and objectives is to help you figure out what to focus on. Otherwise you're like this guy. I just know so much, I don't even know where to start, right? You don't want to be him. So thinking about the presentation, this is really basic, but you have an intro, you have a body, and then you summarize as the components. So during a lecture, when you're preparing your lecture, you want to think about when is attention the greatest in adult learners, and when is material recalled best. They're both sort of the same. What do you think? Votes for at the beginning. Okay, a lot of votes for at the beginning. Middle? Nobody wants the middle. Okay. End? Few people. Any other votes? Before you start, right? When there's food and coffee.
A third of the way in, other.
Other, you want to do a third. So the beginning is the highest. The middle, as you all voted, not so great. And then it does increase slightly at the end when they go, oh, now I want to summarize. And then everyone perks up and goes, okay. So introduction, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. So like I did the learning objectives. What are my goals for today? The body of the talk, you're going to tell a story, you're going to think about 2 to 3 key points that you're going to make, and then you're going to include examples and activities. And then at the end, you're going to tell them what you told them and questions and answers. So, for example, if I'm doing a talk on TB, on tuberculosis, I might want to talk about people being exposed but not infected but not diseased, and then infected and diseased, okay, with active disease. So I want to distinguish those. Then I'm going to talk about diagnosis and clinical manifestations. So these are the kind of key things that I'm going to focus on. And then you just summarize it. So you want to create an effective opening because that's when people are the most alert and most attuned. Highlight why the topic's relevant. We're going to talk about goals and objectives. And then ideally you want to do a detailed outline of the talk before you start making your slides or doing anything else. And then the final prep, after you've done your detailed outline and you've even started doing your slides, is you want to add activities, you want to think about transitions, you want to think about how you're going to demonstrate various things. You're going to talk about, think about a strong summary, and think back to the intro and review your teaching points. And then ideally you want to give them references, right? That you don't just flash up, you may actually provide them to folks so that they can pursue it further if they're interested. So, do you guys remember that? Have you guys seen this? So, introduce yourself. He got everybody's attention, right? During this thing. But and if you're not a funny person, probably don't try and use humor. But if you're a funny person, go for it. You know, like if it's going to fly, or you can try it out, you know, on your friends and buddies or in a small group. But the introduction, you really want to build rapport, introduce the topic, say why it's relevant. It's just like writing a grant. What's the background? What's the significance, right? So you may tell a short story. You may really get them into it because of this horrible statistic or headline. And you may invite participation. In any of those work, again, if you're okay at being funny. And then you wanna think about give them your learning objectives or an outline or an agenda. So like this, so when Ebola was hitting several years ago, you could do something like this to say how catastrophic it was, right? And that we've had almost 6,000 deaths to date. So we're gonna talk about Ebola vaccine, okay, and management. So that's a great way. Okay, when Zika was so big several years ago, you can start really getting people into this by talking about, of course, I think all ID stuff is cool, but if you're really wondering if people are gonna be interested, you're gonna say how devastating, right? You're gonna say this is a devastating disease, Zika, the Zika CNS disease. And then you're gonna just headline some things and talk about travel, because this is more relevant to the US folks, right? So just ways to headline things. So again, starting with your learning objectives is gonna define, I'll never forget when I gave my first talk to second year med students at WashU, and it was this congenital infection talk, and I was so excited about it. I did all these cases and everything, and 3 students came up to me and said, but what do I need to learn for the test, right? And I was devastated. Really? And then I realized I didn't give them objectives, because I gave them a lot of information, but I didn't tell them really what they needed to know. And if I'd given them objectives, they probably would have felt like they had a little more guidance listening to my talk. So first you want to know your audience. This is what they should know. I gave you the TB example, what you want them to take away, and then use action verbs. And the action verbs should be measurable. Many of you have probably already gotten these, but to write learning objectives, you'll see whenever we send out grand rounds, we always ask people to have learning objectives so we can define what they're talking about. So those are examples of action verbs that are measurable. And again, this is how my med students were. Without any objectives, they were trying to learn everything and really wanted to know what they needed to learn. So what if you've heard of Bloom's taxonomy, is that this is sort of the basic knowledge. And then you move up in Bloom's taxonomy to analysis, synthesis, evaluation. And you can choose verbs from anywhere. Ideally, it's pretty hard to get into analysis, synthesis in a big lecture setting. So in a lecture, you're probably gonna be more in this area, which is fine. Then when you're doing team-based learning or teaching on the fly upstairs, you can get into more synthesis of information. So again, we started with these learning objectives for this talk. So list, elucidate, describe, delineate, discuss, list. Thinking about things we want to do during this talk. So based on using the outline you base your outline, on the learning objectives. So when you're creating an outline, you list the objectives or the aims, and you decide how you're going to teach each objective. Is it going to be word slides? Is it going to be a word slide and a graph, a photo, a table? How are you going to discuss each of these? How is it going to best emphasize it? What study are you going to use to emphasize diagnosis in TB or presentation, right? And then think about how you're going to transition from one to the other, which in medicine, transitions are usually pretty easy. So what is the attention span of an adult learner in a lecture? This may be changing. This is the old answer that was studied, but now with people on their phones all the time, watching videos, doing Netflix, doing YouTube, it may actually have gotten less. But what would you guess the attention span of an adult learner in 8 years ago was?
C.
D.
I heard B, 5 to 10. D, 15 to 20.
C.
C, 10 to 15. Go in the middle. Good. So it actually was 15 to 20. Okay. I actually think it's less now.
Yeah.
I'd love to see this study, but I think so you guys are not millennials. I think you're just you're not millennials, right?
We are
I think you're not quite millennials.
right.
Yeah.
Anyway, the millennials are the ones that's attention spans are even shorter than this. So what that means is intermittently during your talk, you want to think about, this is really not optional, but you want to think about activities that are going to bring their attention back and reinforce learning, okay? So this is sort of the general outline, but then think about activities to intersperse, and we'll talk about what those activities can look at. And I'm going to email you guys a fun thing that talks about ways to make it interactive. So the presentation, you're going to think about overviews and summaries. Advanced organizers are fun, like analogies, and we'll talk about what those could be. Repetition, transitions, and then plan changes really probably at least every 15 minutes, okay, to reinvigorate and get your audience back. And think about key points. And try to start and end on time. So engaging sentence, pictures, something to headline it. Prove it with facts, data, tables, diagrams. Visualize it, maybe give examples, talk about a story, and then rephrase it, okay, repeat it. This is from an actress that we once had come visit for a women's career day, and so this was sort of her outline. So here's our a medical disease example, okay? So attention grabber. So there was this guy who came in severe respiratory distress with a temp of 39 and had diffuse infiltrates on his chest x-ray. And what we found out is that he had been mowing the lawn recently. What do you think happened? Do you know? Mary may have heard this before.
How many rabbits were around him?
Rabbit! He hit a rabbit. He felt terrible about it. He didn't remember it. But he hit a rabbit. So you tell that story, right? And you have people guessing. What did he hit? I did not put a poor little rabbit in here. So you get people guessing. What is the disease process, right? So do you know what it is? Francisella tularensis, tularemia. So then you're going to talk about ways that you get it, usually tick-borne, but we can run over rabbits or skin rabbits. And then you talk about the 6 ways that it can present, right? Diagnosis, treatment, and outcomes in an sequela. So, you know, we always have great stories, right, that we can tell for many of our things. So you want to, so that's sort of, we sort of went over outlining the presentation, doing your objectives, how to capture different ways to enforce what you're talking about. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about polishing it. So you tell a story. You write the way you speak. You don't write, so it's really like Shakespeare kind of speak. You practice out loud if possible. Practicing is key. Use simple language, keep phrases short. Don't use a lot of jargon or acronyms that people don't know. Again, highlight key points, recap. So again, this is just reinforcing. Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I understand. So the more involved the audience is. So what different modalities can you use to engage different learners? I would like each of you to pair up 2 or 3 together and think about ways that you can just take 2 minutes. How can you engage learners when you're in a big lecture format? This is called defining dyads, but it can be triads. All right, I'm hearing lots of laughter. Maybe you guys thought of even more creative ways of engaging learners. So ways to engage learners. What kind of things did you think about?
Put them on the spot.
Okay, so you can always call out names. I'll never forget when one attending wanted all the pictures of the residents and fellows. They were giving grand rounds. They wanted all the pictures so they could call on people. And we were like, no. Maybe just ask for volunteers. But you can call on them, right? And get them very engaged. If they know you're going to do that, they're paying attention.
They're not learning, but they are
They're
paying
not
attention.
They're stressed out, right? And different people learn with different degrees of stress, right? So some people may do fine with that, some not so much. What other ways to engage learners?
We talked about positive reinforcement.
Break them up in groups, okay? Positive reinforcement, okay. Oh, candy bars, yeah.
Near and dear to my heart. Great concept.
So our chair used to throw beer at the med students when they got answers correctly. That got outlawed, but then candy would be good. All right.
One of my attendings used to throw dollar bills at us.
Whoa. Okay. That made lots of sense. Any other ways? I like this. Bribery's good.
Like making it a game or like competitive.
Great. Yeah, so Jeopardy's fun, right? Any kind of cahoots they've been using for the med students. Yeah, all kinds of fun ways. Any other thoughts?
Oh yeah, we talked about audience response and
Great.
a little sticker system.
Yeah. And we just subscribe to Poll Everywhere, the education office, and we're happy to loan that out for people to use. We also, Bob has the clickers with the audience response that he's willing to loan.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
But the thing is, Poll Everywhere, it's just on the cell phone, so.
So it's easy. And
And
we have
everyone
one,
has
we paid for it, so you can actually get up to 75 or 100. So it's nice, it's not just the free one. Great, all right. So engaging them, so obviously doing like a really cool diagram and pointing out different ways you can intervene, for example, in HIV therapy. You can do cases, you can talk about current events, photographs, so people are really into photographs, graphs, diagrams, tables, cartoons. I have like 2 massive Far Side cartoon books, so if anyone wants Far Side cartoons. Videos, movies, like today, he did this hilarious movie of herding cats. It was really funny. All these cowboys trying to herd cats. But he had some very funny movies to just sort of broke up the talk. Handouts with space for notes. So some of us, like I'm a read-write person, that keeps me with it. Advanced organizers or analogies to bridge something your adult learner has experienced before with something they're learning new. So the thermostat for negative feedback inhibition in endo, or the fence that's the immune system protecting the house, which is the body, from the dog, which is HIV. So, or pumps and pipes and all. I'm sure you cardiologists have way more ideas of ways to think about it. And the schoolhouse, what does that represent? For those who trained here, the thymus. For those who trained with Louis Marker, the thymus is the schoolhouse. So those are ways. What, Adam?
What's the plus sign and the question mark?
Oh, what is the schoolhouse? I didn't want to give it away. Maybe someone will know. What is the schoolhouse? I don't know why I did the plus sign. It's probably a typo. It was supposed to be an equals. I'll have to fix that. So, and then at the end, summarize key points, talk about further learning, identify any concepts that need clarification, answer questions. So now, anything about the outline learning objectives before we embark on presentation style? Okay. So your style is really as important as the content, because if you're really dry and really monologue and everyone falls asleep, then that's not going to deliver the content, no matter how awesome it is. So think about your apparel not being too distracting, too colorful, too outrageous. jewelry, so we always talk about the bracelet lady who, nobody knows her name, but they came to present to us and everyone just remembers the bracelet. It's nice to have a beverage. I would recommend not caffeinated beverage, but to have something that you can drink if your mouth gets dry. I always bring a copy of my talk because I've seen too many times where, you know, the bulb goes out or whatever. So I always have a copy of my talk, often write notes on it. I always write at the beginning how I could make it better the next time. So if I give it again, I can think about it. But I always have this so that I can refer back. It's just helpful. And do 6 so you save trees. And then nonverbal communication. If you're like playing with a paper clip or if I'm like tossing this the whole time, that's very distracting, okay? You want to be, again, respectful of people and you want to be confident. You know, usually when you're giving a talk, you know way more about the topic than anyone else in the room. So that's part of it. Know the setting. Again, set things up, arrive early. The more you prepare, the less nervous you're going to be about your presentation. So preparation is key. Voice techniques, again, conversational, vary your delivery so it's not monotone. Try not to read the slides or your notes. If possible, try and memorize them. Be enthusiastic, make eye contact. Gestures are okay, just not tons of distracting gestures. And it's okay to move. Again, the guy this morning, he was all over the front of the room, but it wasn't distracting. It was great. And then he even ran up the
He was
steps.
up the aisle.
He ran up the steps to grab somebody's attention. It worked. Grabbed all of our attention. So act confident, even if you're not. Act confident, because people won't know. And then reflect on how's it going. How's your audience? Are they responding to you? Is everything good? Or if your audience is like this, it's time to jump on the table, right? But think about, you're getting definite vibes about you need to change things. So in that case, you want to think about adding a little more drama to your delivery. So vary the pitch and pace, emphasize key words, you know, use your hands, that's okay, enunciate and articulate, and breathe from the diaphragm. And I always tell people, before you go up to give a talk, take a couple of deep breaths, okay? It's a really good thing, so you're not getting short of breath. So just cleansing breaths are always really good. And then you want to be passionate, again, about your topic, okay? So Oprah Winfrey had a very passionate, what's that?
Drugs are bad things.
Yeah, this may be a little overdone for a medical presentation, right? But you want to be passionate. So when we had this actress come, I'll never forget this because I do it before I give any big talk now, is she said, before you walk up to give the talk or while you're walking up, you think to yourself, you don't say this out loud, you think to yourself, I can't wait to tell you about this. I'm so excited to tell you about this. Because then it takes away not, I'm so anxious. It's like, I can't wait to share this with you. You know, so you're focused now on your audience and how excited you are. So that is like one key thing I took away from that, is to really think, I really am excited. I've like worked a lot on this. I've thought a lot about this and I can't wait to tell you about tularemia or whatever it is. So I think that's helpful. All right, so now I'm gonna do a little talk for you all. While I get ready, I'm gonna have you all pass these out. These are just oral presentation checklist. And so I'm gonna do a little talk and I'm gonna want a little feedback on the talk. All right. So I want feedback on the content, the slides, and the presentation style. All right. So I'm going to talk about community-acquired MRSA, okay? All right. That's key. All right. So hospitals are seeing a really dramatic rise of MRSA in children. One quote pointed out, an encounter with MRSA is the scourge of the healthcare world. Okay. I was gonna try to blow bubbles, but we have to enough to do that. And you will see some very bad manifestations of MRSA here. So, this all started in St. Louis. There were 5 St. Louis Rams football players. You can see them here. And the infection was associated with where they were, field position, and the higher the BMI. Okay? Got that? And then there were other outbreaks among other football players clearly associated with shaving, okay, sharing equipment, and whirlpools. And you can see right here what they had. Turf burn, MRSA. Turf burn, MRSA, okay? So, community-acquired MRSA affects the young and healthy. Reports of severe disease after influenza have definitely been seen, and increased relative risk of mortality. And then there's skin and soft tissue infections are often seen in the lower extremities and the torso. And it affects the young and healthy. And, yeah, increased risk of relative mortality. And there's healthcare outbreaks that we often worry about, and so you all need to be really careful after touching keyboards and phones and wash your hands well. Okay. And then, as you can see, there was this study where they looked at colonization with community-acquired MRSA, nasal colonization, you can see that here. And what you see is from 2001 to 2004, same group found, see here? 4 out of 500, 0.9% colonization to 9.2%, tenfold increase, right? Pretty impressive. All right, there we go. How was that? Wasn't that great? All right, don't you love my holiday bracelet? This is the bracelet lady, she inspired me. So tell me a little bit about what went well and what didn't go so well. Did anything go well?
I was gonna say.
Hard to take your eyes off.
You were passionate
You
about
were
it.
just like.
I was passionate. Right, I was pretty darn distracting, right? Did you hear anything I said over the bracelet? Not much, right?
I couldn't look away.
It's funny, but not for the reason we were joking.
Right. The humor was more about the presenter than the humor, right?
There was a nice drama element to it.
There was some drama.
Captivating.
Okay. What about this?
Too much.
Too much. Way too much, right? What about this?
Not enough.
I thought the pictures that were a little small.
Right?
Could've
This
been
is my biggest pet peeve, right? People paste in something and it's so small you can't see it. Like even if you're in a grand rounds room, right? But especially here, like you want these. My thing is you put it in and you blow it up as big as you can, right? So everyone can see it. So people aren't straining, because you don't want people straining after you work so hard on this talk, right? And then way too much animation, right? What about this? Yeah, so red on red. Now I'm thinking, Dr. Tucker, I don't think he'll mind if I call him out, is red-green colorblind. Can you see that at all?
I
you
can
even see?
barely see any numbers in there.
Yeah, so.
I couldn't see what they are at all.
Really hard. See, the person does it to emphasize it, and then you lose it all. And this is a really busy slide, right? Like with the things. So, okay, cool. And then don't chew gum. Try not to chew gum when you're giving a talk. So what if I said
Well, I
we
was
were-
going to say the other thing that you were doing.
Oh, what else?
which
Oh,
many
yeah.
people do, the pointer.
the
Pointers can be your nemesis. Be careful with them.
So, many of you may have learned that some of us get really anxious, right? And so the pointer's all over the place unintentionally. So it's hard for me to do it with the other hand, but what I usually do is hold my hand on the podium and then brace it so you can point and then you're not nervous and not shaking, if that makes sense. So when you're pointing like this, so you're not like this. And then you don't want to underline things, okay? You really just want to point out things on graphs or key aspects. You don't want to be doing the pointer, all over. And then you'll always see people, the pointer's way up here, all over the place. So, yeah.
Or it moves so quickly you don't see what they're pointing at all.
Yeah. So sometimes it's easier to just, have circles around it with your PowerPoint. What PowerPoint tips have you heard? What things to do, not to do? This is the last section.
Don't make your slide too busy.
Yeah, not too busy so you don't lose everyone, right? So like pictures and words and,
Not too many different colors.
Yeah.
And different fonts.
good, good.
Not a lot of animation.
You don't like this. Right, right. And that's another thing with the animation, sorry Mary, is Prezi presentations, you guys have seen those? Those can be nauseating if you're moving too fast, so be really careful if you're shifting those. It's okay to use them, but they can be nauseating if it's too much. Mary, what?
I said try not to read from the slides.
Yeah, try not to read from the slides. Great. Any other?
I've heard both. Is it the light on dark or the dark on light? Which one's accepted now? I know the font's supposed to be like soft edge, so like Arial, like non-times, that sort of thing, but,
Either one.
okay.
Dark,
As long as
dark
there's a
and white,
contrast.
you need the contrast, that's
Okay.
exactly right, either one's fine. So many of you may have heard number of slides less than or equal to number of minutes of a talk. I've never done that, but it's a good thing to go by if possible. Font should be greater than 16 for sure, and the rule of sevens, do you know that? Which is probably even too many. Yeah, 7 words, 7 bullets. No more than 7 words, 7 bullets, but even 7 bullets is a little much. If you have more lines, like medical talks, you can animate, just like I did just then, so people aren't trying to read it all. Look at it from the back of the room. Ideally, look at it from the room you're presenting in. That's the best if you can go there and practice. Again, avoid red green for Dr. Drucker unless you don't want him to see it. I always say, unless you women in the room don't want the guys to see it, because more of them are red green colorblind, then that's okay. But try and avoid red green if possible. It's hard. And then again, bring a copy of the talk in case there's malfunctions. So font size, right? And then font basics. So again, most people recommend 18 to 48. These are a ton of cognitive burden for people trying to read this. You want to be as easy to read as possible, like you were saying, Jacob. So Calibria, Arial, Helvetica. Capital letters are really like shouty, and so I would try and avoid those. Avoid a lot of abbreviations on your slides. You can maybe say the acronyms, but make sure you've got everyone online. Or in tune with what they are, and then try not to do tons of cutesy punctuation marks, emojis, probably not so good for a professional talk unless it's just one sort of funny part. So this is what you were talking about. So either one is okay, but you don't want to do too much color, which I think somebody mentioned. Colors that contrast, certain combinations are not good. So the red on blue gets lost. It looks great on your computer screen, and then it's just lost when you project it. So dark background with light text works the best. So again, animation simple, you guys got this. Titles, I think it's really helpful to have titles that orient the audience, okay? Like community acquired MRSA, increasing prevalence in hospitals or something, and then you give the data. Highlight what's important. You can either use, the circles and make sure they're weighted enough so that you can really see what's important. Tables, graphs, orient the audience first, the x-axis, the y-axis. Try and not make it too small, too many per slide, too many words. So here you would say, okay, I want to show you normal rectal temperatures in boys and girls. And so here on the y-axis we have temperatures in Fahrenheit, and then over here we have age in months. And what you can see is for the girls, they run generally lower temperatures than the boys, okay? So you want to walk people through it. Sometimes people just throw up a slide and then move on, and you haven't walked them through it. If you're gonna do this busy slide, right, you can highlight it and then you can see it. It's not red on red, and it's just a white background. How do you make this less blurry? So people, how could I make this slide better overall?
They have to shrink the figure or else run it through some software that's gonna take the pixels off.
Okay.
I would take out all the words.
Yeah.
You can rewrite
So
it.
this is
Just
gone,
put it
right?
in, yeah.
You get rid of this, and then you may wanna just say the title, different rates of hospitalizations between two vaccination groups, right? So that's gonna be your title up here, and get rid of all of this. How do I get this less blurry?
It has to do with the original image too. Where do you get it from?
That's right, that's right. So, when you're cutting and pasting from a PDF, we're usually looking at it at 75 or 100%, depending on what you are. So what I usually do is take the snapshot, blow it up to 200 or 400%, then copy it and paste it. And then you get rid of the blurriness, okay? It works a lot better. It doesn't always work with some PDFs, but most of the time it works, so you can see how much better it is. And then again, my pet peeve, don't do it just here. Blow it up so people can see it, okay? And walk people through the legends. So things not to do, just to sort of summarize, try to avoid talking to the laptop. You know, you see people just talking to the laptop and reading. Look around, talk to your audience, and then look to the slides. Don't look on the laptop. Use the slides to reference, because then they're going to be looking at the right thing. Avoid moving objects, long paragraphs, the hiding behind the podium and grabbing, you know, like if you're gonna be gripping it, put your hands in so nobody can see the white knuckle kind of grip. And try not to like sort of dance and stuff behind the podium, you know, people can see that too. And then again, we talked about pointer tips. It's really hard to avoid, you know, or like this. So you want to try and avoid that, but sometimes it's hard. When you listen to yourself, you'll notice how much you're doing it. Try and avoid skipping through multiple slides. Never assume what you teach is what they learn, right? Because we know the retention may be very different. What things to do? So repeat your key points. Use those adult learning principles of respect, building on what they know. Tell a story. That's always fun. Use different modalities, enunciate and speak loud enough, be enthusiastic, believe in yourself and everything you've learned and what you're going to impart. Practice a lot, especially in the room if possible. Be flexible if things go wrong, and think about what microphone options you want. And again, ideally change every 10 to 20 minutes, because you really want to gauge your audience's responsiveness, right? This is when you can throw candy. That's the other time to throw candy, is when they're all sound asleep, right? So again, anytime you start a student activity, that's going to increase your attention. So again, worse, better students recall. You're going to lose people, and then you do an activity and you bring them back up. So you want to keep doing that every 10 to 20 minutes. So what other things can you do to maintain learners' attention? We talked about engaging learners with different styles. How can you increase their attention to you, and that will facilitate their thinking and learning? What things can you do? And I'll send you this 20 tips, but what can you do to get learners engaged? So we did this little defining dyads, right? So that's a way. So when I've done that is, okay, I've given a case. You know, I've got a kid with a abscess, an MRSA abscess, your favorite topic after today's talk. And it's 10 centimeters. So do you drain it? Then you give them options. Drain or not, antibiotics or not, send them home, admit, right? And then you say, okay, I want you guys to just do defining dyads and talk about it. What other things can you do?
Poll the audience.
Poll the audience, I love that. So either just raise your hands, do poll everywhere. Anything else? There's all kinds of things. I can tell I'm like losing you guys. But so you can ask questions and wait. The guy this morning, he just waited. You know, like just long pause, and people get so uncomfortable. Even in the grand rounds room, somebody says something. Stories that tie in with real circumstances. This defining dyads role play always is fun to get people. You know, if you're doing a communication thing, or yeah, Andrew's like, that's not fun. But if you like want them to role play communication or professionalism or something, you can do that. You can have them develop lists of differential lists. Again, the poll everywhere, audience response. Problem solving, so again, give them a case. Film excerpts are always fun, you know, Grey's Anatomy to whatever. The pause, just pause and then you get everyone's attention. Having them give feedback, reflecting on something, giving them something to reflect on, a question they have, brainstorm. They can write a quick 1-minute paper with what they've learned, and I'll send you the 20 tips for lecturing. So what do we use today?
Ask questions and learn.
Ask questions. So ask questions in general, like advantages, disadvantages, and then ask specific questions, right, with multiple choice answers. Defining dyads. Little story, little tularemia story, yeah.
Made a list.
Made a list, yeah. And I gave a really bad example of how to give a talk, right? Like really bad. But it got your attention. Right? So the 3 Ps, prepare, practice, perform. Okay, the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll feel. So I want you each to commit to at least 1, if not 2, key points that you'll apply in future talks that you give. And if anyone's brave enough to shout them out. Anything you learn that you're going to take with you, that you're going to remember. I'll be really sad if nobody says anything.
Probably gonna wear one of those bracelets.
Yeah,
There you go.
he's going to wake people up. Okay, you're all falling asleep.
I put too much on my slides, always, no
Okay.
matter what. So I think probably the rule of 7.
Cut down 7 and 7.
Yeah,
Great.
it's hard, but
Which means you'll have bigger fonts, easier to read, right? Anything else?
I say, you know, a lot.
Great. Yeah.
I always forget to bring water.
Yeah. That's key. You get really dry.
I like the defining dyads.
It's fun and it's easy. I mean, I gave you guys even less than 2 minutes to talk and you could think about some ideas, right? And you all had fun. Great, great. Yeah, I think things to increase interaction are great. So just to summarize, we know there's advantages and disadvantages of large group talks. Try to incorporate adult learning principles, which will be discussed in more detail next week. Create these learning objectives with action verbs. And then organizational strategies, intro, body, summary. Do a detailed outline first, and then think about cases, examples, tables, etc. And then close by repeating the message. You're going to develop your own presentation style over time. If you incorporate humor or not, what you want to do. And think about teaching strategies that are going to enhance interaction or retention. And then remember the PowerPoint tips. And you'll all be great. Any questions? All right, well, thank you. Go forth and teach.